Mike clapped a hand on my shoulder, pulling me forward as if I were a new apprentice. "This here's Kyle," he boomed to the client. "He just handles the dirt. I'm the one who makes the real decisions." The client chuckled, looking at my mud-splattered boots. My face burned. Mike winked. "Just keep digging, pal." The spring air was still sharp with the scent of thawing earth and fresh-cut lumber when I first found myself working for Mike Peterson. He was a force, a man whose presence filled a room, or in our case, an entire construction site. His company, Peterson Construction, had landed a big development, a cluster of high-end homes rising from what used to be a cornfield on the outskirts of Grand Haven. My landscaping busyness, small and mostly word of mouth, kept me busy enough, but Mike's projects offered a scale I hadn't touched before. I watched him one afternoon, shouting across a half-framed living room at a carpenter who'd misaligned a window frame. Mike's face was red, his voice booming. "You call that plumb, Gary? That's crooked enough to hang your coat on, and it ain't staying." Gary mumbled an apology, shoulders slumping. Mike didn't let up until the man was tearing out the work. It wasn't pretty to watch, but I understood it. Mike demanded quality, the same way I demanded perfection from my own sod lines and stone pathways. He wanted things done right, even if it meant a scene. There was something in that directness, that uncompromising drive, that I respected. A few weeks later, Mike called. He had a tricky kitchen cabinet installation that his regular crew was struggling with. "Too many angles," he grumbled over the phone. "They're making a mess of it." I'd done cabinet work before, custom stuff, and I knew how to coax wood into tight spaces. I went over that evening after my own crew had packed up. The cabinets were high-gloss white, meant for a sleek, modern kitchen. The corners were indeed tight, unforgiving. I stayed late, working under the temporary lights, the smell of sawdust filling the empty house. Mike came by the next morning, coffee in hand. He looked at the finished work, ran a hand over a mitered corner. "Clean," he said, nodding. "Real clean." "Took longer than it should have," I replied, wiping my hands on my jeans. He just grunted, then asked my rate. I told him $50 an hour. It was more than I usually charge for general labor, but I knew what this specific skill was worth, especially under pressure. He didn't bat an eye. "30 hours?" he asked, doing the math in his head. "Okay, fine. I'll cut you a check." That was the start. Soon, Peterson Construction became my primary client. Mike called me for everything: landscaping, finished carpentry, even supervising smaller crews when he was tied up elsewhere. The money was good, better than I'd ever consistently made. My bank account grew, my old pickup truck was replaced by a newer model, and I moved from my small apartment into a modest house with a decent yard. But as the months turned into a year, I felt a quiet unease. I was making Mike's projects shine, but my own company's name was fading. My landscaping business, Miller Landscapes, was barely a side note. One Tuesday, after we'd finished a particularly challenging deck, I cornered him. "Mike," I started, "I need to start scaling back, focus on my own stuff more." He looked at me, genuinely surprised, his booming voice quiet for once. "Scale back? Kyle, you're the best man I've got. The clients love your work." I nodded. "I appreciate that, Mike, I really do. But I've got my own goals, you know?" He frowned, then a smile slowly spread across his face. "Tell you what, my sister, Carla, she handles the books. Come meet us tomorrow. We'll talk about goals." The next afternoon, I found myself in a tastefully decorated office, the kind with muted colors and framed photos of successful projects. Carla Brown sat behind a large desk, her posture straight, her eyes watchful. She was older than Mike, with a sharper face and a less forgiving gaze. She barely offered a greeting. Just a quick nod, her attention fixed on me as I settled into the chair Mike indicated. I felt like an exhibit. Mike did all the talking, his usual jovial self. He spoke about growth, about expanding, about the good work I brought to the table. Then he looked at me, serious. "Kyle, I want to offer you a partnership. 20% of Peterson Construction." I blinked. It was a generous offer, completely out of left field. My share would be substantial. Mike would keep 60%, and Carla, it turned out, already held 20%. We met with a lawyer a week later, a man whose words were a thick fog of legal jargon. I signed where I was told. the pages feeling heavy and official. Carla sat across from me, her lips a thin line, her gaze drilling into me. Her displeasure was a palpable thing in the quiet room, a silent accusation aimed directly at my gut. Peterson Construction, with my name now on the papers, really took off. My dedication to quality, combined with Mike's salesmanship and Carla's tight financial management, made us a formidable team. We became known for meticulous work, finished on time, every time. I hired Miguel Sanchez, a young man from a nearby town, whose diligence and quiet focus on supporting his family reminded me a lot of myself in earlier years. He helped me manage projects, taking some of the burden off my shoulders. Professionally, things were good. More than good. My personal life, though, remained much the same. Quiet, a simple bachelor's existence, my house clean and uncluttered, my evenings spent reading or puttering in my own small garden. With Peterson Construction thriving, I found myself making more frequent trips to the big box home improvement store on the edge of town. It was a place of familiar routines, the lumber aisle, the hardware section, and then, always, a stop and paint. That's where I started noticing Amy. She worked behind the counter, mixing colors, her movements precise, her blonde hair usually tied back in a neat ponytail. She wasn't loud or flashy, just efficient, with a quiet smile that appeared when she thought no one was looking. My material runs grew longer. I'd find myself lingering, pretending to compare shades of beige, waiting for a moment when the counter was clear. "Need anything special today?" she'd ask, her voice soft but with a practical edge. I'd usually have some question, a technicality about primer or a new brand of caulk. One time I mentioned a client who was particular about wallpaper. Her eyes lit up. "Oh, I do wallpaper on the side," she said, almost shyly. "Nights and weekends, if you ever have anyone who needs it." I told her I'd keep it in mind. "Amy, right?" I asked, and she nodded, a small blush rising on her cheeks. "Kyle," I offered back. It was during one of these polite, almost formal exchanges that I noticed her left hand. No ring, not a diamond, not even a simple band. It was a small detail, but it lodged itself in my mind. Our conversations became a regular, unspoken appointment. I'd time my visits for her shift, sometimes fabricating a reason to pick up a single brush or a tube of sealant. We'd talk about the weather, about difficult clients, about the merits of different paint brands. There was a quiet understanding that grew between us, a sense of shared space in the fluorescent hum of the store. One Tuesday, I was picking up a dozen gallons of exterior paint. Amy was measuring out a custom tint when a bulky man in a manager's vest strode up to the counter. His name tag read Dale Harris. He stopped short, his heavy frame filling the space, and glared at Amy. "Amy, what's taking so long with these orders?" he demanded, his voice thick and low, cutting through the general store noise. He didn't wait for her answer, instead casting a sharp, assessing glance at me, as if I were somehow complicit in her delay. Amy flinched, her shoulders tightening. "I'm just finishing up," she murmured, her gaze fixed on the paint mixer. Dale grunted, then turned his attention back to her, leaning in close. "You know how I get when things aren't done on time, don't you?" He didn't raise his voice, but the tone was loaded. Amy nodded, not looking at him. When he stepped away, she turned to me, her eyes wider than usual. "He gets mad," she whispered, "if I don't do what he wants." A faint flush colored her cheeks again, and I felt a prickle of something. A question I couldn't quite form about her situation with Dale. She quickly looked at the clock on the wall above the paint chips. "I'm off in 15 minutes, she said, a new urgency in her voice. "I don't want him to make me stay longer." She hurried off to the back room, disappearing through a door marked "Employees Only." I paid for my paint, my mind replaying the exchange. The way she flinched, the subtle threat in Dale's voice, her quiet fear. On an impulse, I decided to wait. I loaded the cans into my truck, then pulled it to the far end of the parking lot, positioning it so I could see the employee exit. I waited, engine off, the late afternoon sun slanting across the asphalt. My intention was simple, to ask her if she wanted to grab a burger or a coffee, just a meal, something easy. 15 minutes later, the employee door opened. Amy emerged, walking briskly, her purse slung over her shoulder. She was almost to the main sidewalk when Dale Harris stepped out from behind a parked pickup truck, seemingly from nowhere. He blocked her path. He was too close, his large frame looming over her. I watched as he spoke, his face unreadable from this distance, but his hand went to her arm, a possessive grip that wasn't exactly gentle. Amy looked up at him, then her eyes darted across the parking lot, sweeping past my truck. For a fleeting second, her gaze met mine. There was a flicker there, a distress I couldn't ignore, a silent plea perhaps, or maybe just my own interpretation. Then she averted her eyes, and without another word, she opened the passenger door of his dark, mud-splattered truck and climbed in. Dale got in on the driver's side and the truck pulled out of the lot, heading west. I sat there, the engine still off, a strange mix of disappointment and a cold prickle of concern working its way through me. It wasn't my business, I told myself, a mantra to push away the feeling. People had their lives. But her image lingered, that brief, distressed glance, holding itself steady in my mind as I finally started my truck and pulled onto the road. After that day in the parking lot, my visits to the big home improvement store didn't change in frequency, but the nature of my talks with Amy did. They became shorter, more guarded. Her smile, which had once felt quietly inviting, now seemed a little dimmer. I noticed a subtle shift in her demeanor, a faint shadow beneath her eyes that spoke of restless nights. She looked tired, a quiet slump sometimes in her shoulders as she went about her tasks in the paint department. The easy banter we'd once shared was replaced by practical questions about colors and quantities, the conversation rarely straying beyond work. One afternoon, I had a client asking about a custom wallpaper job for a guest bedroom. The design was intricate, a floral pattern that needed careful alignment. It was a perfect opportunity. "I've got a small wallpaper job," I told Amy, leaning against the counter, trying to keep my voice casual. "Client's particular. Thought of you since you mentioned it." Her eyes brightened, a flash of genuine relief passing through them. "Oh yes," she said, her voice a little too eager. "I'd really appreciate that, Kyle. Anything for extra work." We exchanged numbers, the business card I offered feeling more significant than just a professional exchange. She came to the job site the following Saturday. The house was empty, quiet save for the rustle of the paper and the soft hiss of the smoothing brush. Amy was meticulous, her movements precise, trimming seams with a razor blade held steady, her concentration absolute. She worked without complaint, even when a difficult corner tested her patience. As the day wore on, working side by side in the silent house, the guardedness between us began to fray. We talked not about work, but about our lives. I told her about my aspirations for Peterson Construction, about the quiet satisfaction of building something from the ground up. She listened, her head cocked, occasionally offering a soft hum of acknowledgement. Then she spoke of her own struggles, hesitantly at first, then with a quiet outpouring that suggested she hadn't had many ears to confide in. She confirmed what I'd suspected. Her relationship with Dale Harris was complicated and deeply unhappy. "He gets mad easily," she explained, her voice barely a whisper as she carefully lined up a floral repeat. "Doesn't like me doing things without him knowing. Or with other people, really." She described a life constrained by his possessive nature, his unspoken demands. He didn't hit her, she clarified, but his control was a constant pressure, a weight she carried. She felt trapped, financially reliant on him in ways she couldn't easily escape. "It's not easy to just leave," she said, her gaze fixed on the pattern, avoiding mine. "Not when he holds all the cards." A quiet concern settled deep in my gut. I found myself feeling a protective instinct toward her, a desire to ease the burden she carried. Away from Amy's quiet struggles, my professional life was thriving, and with it came a different kind of connection. Mike Peterson had a way of drawing people into his orbit. He and his wife, Brenda, a kind woman with a warm, open face, often invited me for dinner. Their house was lively, usually filled with the cheerful chaos of their two young children. Brenda would fuss over me, making sure my plate was full, asking about my day, her genuine fondness clear in her easy conversation. Mike would slap my back, talk shop, and laugh loud. It was an easy camaraderie, Mike stepping into a big brother role I hadn't realized I lacked. Their home was a place of comfort, a picture of contented family life, something stable and good. Seeing Brenda's seemingly content existence, her home filled with warmth and laughter, only sharpened the contrast with Amy's quiet desperation. One woman held a steady hand, a loving family. The other felt trapped, living under a shadow. The contrast was stark, and it made the lines between my professional interest in Amy and something more personal begin to blur. One evening after we'd finished a late wallpaper job at a rental property, a smaller project I'd given her to help with her income, we went for a meal. It was just a diner, the kind with red vinyl booths and coffee that never stopped flowing. We talked long into the night, the mundane details of our days giving way to quieter confidences. The shared silences felt comfortable, a natural extension of our conversation. The fluorescent hum of the diner replaced the stores, but this time the quiet understanding felt like it belonged only to us. The conversations at the diner had opened a door, and through it, the emotional connection between Amy and me deepened, fueled by the raw vulnerability she'd shown. She continued to confide in me, describing Dale's temper, the way his moods dictated her days, her growing fear of his unpredictable outbursts. She spoke of wanting a different life, a quiet longing for independence that seemed almost out of reach for her. I listened, my own feelings a complicated mix of desire and a fierce, growing urge to protect her from the shadow that Dale cast. There was a quiet voice in my conscience, a steady hum that warned me away. It spoke of complications, of lines not meant to be crossed, of the messiness that inevitably followed such decisions. But the pull towards Amy was stronger, a current too powerful to ignore. One damp autumn evening, after a late project, the last of the crew gone, we lingered in the empty house. The air was cool, the silence profound. I reached for her hand, my fingers brushing hers. She didn't pull away. In that moment, the line was crossed. Our affair began, a clandestine existence woven into the fabric of our days. It was discreet, hidden in plain sight, mostly after hours on secluded job sites, or during extended lunch breaks taken far from the main road. The initial thrill was potent, a heady mix of exhilaration and a persistent, gnawing guilt. Each stolen moment of happiness felt desperate, an escape from the stark realities waiting for us back in our separate lives. Her touch was a momentary reprieve, a soft hand in the chaos. Carla Brown, with her sharp eyes and even sharper mind, didn't miss much. "Working late a lot lately, Kyle?" she'd ask, her voice flat, devoid of real warmth. "Everything on schedule?" She'd look at me, her gaze dissecting, as if she could see the truth beneath the surface. My answers were always quick, dismissive. "Just tying up loose ends," I'd say, forcing a casual shrug, knowing she observed every twitch, every hesitation. Carla missed nothing, and I felt the unspoken judgment in her quiet scrutiny. Mike, meanwhile, remained oblivious. He was too busy selling, too busy booming, too focused on the next big contract. He continued to treat me as a trusted friend and an invaluable business partner, completely unaware of the secret unraveling just beneath the surface of our shared work. His invitations for dinner with Brenda and the kids still came, though I found myself making excuses more often than not. Brenda, though, was another story. She noticed things, small changes, a new distance in Mike's schedule, a subtle preoccupation that wasn't quite like him. I saw her watching him sometimes, a quiet frown creasing her brow, her kind eyes holding a question she hadn't yet voiced. Mike, ever gregarious, had always been open, and now there was a quiet shift, a subtle tightening of his routine that Brenda was picking up on, though she might not have understood the meaning of it. Amy, always on edge, expressed her fear constantly. "If Dale finds out," she'd whisper, her face pale, "I don't know what he'll do. His temper," she'd trail off, the unspoken threat hanging heavy in the air between us. I tried to reassure her, my words feeling hollow even to my own ears. The truth was, I felt the constant pressure of discovery, too. Each text, each clandestine meeting, felt like playing with fire, the potential for an explosion always just out of reach. The secret relationship began to impact my focus on work. Small things at first, a delayed order for a specific type of tile, a miscalculation on a material estimate that Miguel had to correct, minor oversights that I would have caught easily before. My mind was often elsewhere, replaying a conversation, planning a rendezvous. I was living a double life, a strain that began to show in the small, almost imperceptible ways. My sleep was shallower, my nerves a little frayed, the quiet hum of conscience replaced by a louder, more insistent thrum of unease. The affair with Amy continued, a precarious tightrope walk stretched taut over the growing chasms of risk. Each stolen moment felt both vital and dangerous, a desperate grab for connection in a life increasingly defined by secrecy. We communicated in clipped texts, coded phrases, our meetings brief and often punctuated by the nervous glances Amy cast over her shoulder. Her fear of Dale was a constant hum, a low thrum beneath every conversation. Brenda, Mike's wife, began to carry a subtle weight, a quiet sadness that seemed out of place in her usually cheerful demeanor. I noticed her eyes lingering on Mike a moment too long, her questions to him a little too pointed. He'd brush them off, laugh loudly, but the laughter never quite reached her eyes. She started noticing details, the faint scent of something unfamiliar on his clothes, his late returns from what he vaguely described as site checks or client meetings. I knew, in a way I couldn't explain, that her suspicions about Mike's fidelity were quietly taking root. One afternoon, I saw Brenda and Carla in hushed conversation in the Peterson construction office. Brenda's voice was low, strained. Carla, typically impassive, listened, her expression initially dismissive, but then a slow, calculating frown creased her brow. Her gaze, already wary of me, seemed to sharpen further, observing my interactions with Mike as if searching for a hidden truth. She was looking for patterns now, I could feel it, her financial acumen extending to the human element. Meanwhile, Dale Harris was becoming bolder, more volatile. The threatening phone calls to Amy escalated into actual appearances. He'd show up at the home improvement store, lingering near the paint department, his presence a palpable threat. He came to her small apartment building, once even pounding on the door until neighbors intervened. Amy was terrified, her pleas for me to be more careful becoming desperate. "He'll do something, Kyle," she'd whisper, clutching my arm, her knuckles white. "He gets violent when he's jealous. You don't know him like I do." The tension finally snapped one evening when I saw Dale's truck parked outside Amy's place. I pulled over, my own truck a discreet distance away. He was yelling, his voice carrying clearly in the cool air. I got shut out, my jaw tight. "Leave her alone, Dale," I said, my voice steady, though my hands were clenched. He turned, his eyes burning with a dark anger. "You stay out of this, landscaper," he sneered, taking a step towards me. "She's mine, and you're messing with the wrong man." The exchange was heated, quick, a flurry of accusations and threats. My intervention only seemed to fuel his rage, solidifying his belief that I was indeed involved with Amy. He began to follow Amy more overtly, planting seeds of doubt and suspicion about her activities with me, whispering things to her colleagues, insinuating our connection to anyone who would listen. Miguel Sanchez, my diligent project manager, began to notice my increasing disappearances, the vague explanations for my late returns. He was loyal, but he wasn't blind. "Everything all right, Kyle?" he'd ask, his eyes holding a quiet concern, a subtle shift in his tone that implied a deeper question. "You've been distracted. Don't want anything messing up the good thing we've got going here." It was an indirect warning, a quiet nudge to consider the risks of my choices. Life has a way of showing you the cost of your choices, sometimes in ways you never anticipate. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. One evening, a little over a month later, Brenda was driving home late from her book club. She later recounted this to Carla, and Carla mentioned it to me in a different context, weeks down the line. Brenda saw Mike's truck, unmistakable, parked off a gravel road near the Old Stone Quarry, a secluded spot known for contractors' late-night meetings. She didn't see Mike, but she did see my own familiar pickup truck pull away from that very same spot just minutes later, its headlights cutting through the dusk. The observation must have solidified a terrible thought in her mind. She confronted Mike that night, his defensiveness and dismissive attitude only cementing her growing fears. The arguments began, hushed at first, then escalating into terse silences that hung heavy in their house. Carla, now fully activated by Brenda's distress, began a systematic investigation. She dove into the company's books, cross-referencing Mike's travel, his expenses, his alleged client meetings. She found inconsistencies, discrepancies that painted a picture Brenda could no longer ignore. The gut-wrenching realization dawned on Brenda, though I wouldn't fully grasp its devastating impact until much later. It wasn't another woman Mike was seeing. In her mind, in her grief-stricken clarity, it was me. It was Kyle. The inevitable came with a cold, brutal swiftness. I didn't see the exact moment Brenda found the proof, but the seismic shockwave that followed left little doubt. Mike called me late one night, his voice thick with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "She knows, Kyle," he rasped, the words barely intelligible. "Brenda knows everything." He didn't elaborate on how, only that her evidence was undeniable. What I later pieced together was that Brenda had found texts, obscure references, and a pattern of absences that, combined with Carla's financial digging, left no room for doubt. The confrontation between them, I imagine, must have been devastating. Their marriage, cohesive, their picture-perfect family life, shattered in an instant, the echoes of their arguments reaching even my quiet house across town. The next day, she came for me. Brenda arrived at my house unannounced, her face drawn and pale, eyes red-rimmed but blazing with a cold fury I hadn't known she possessed. She stood on my porch, her shoulders stiff, a stranger in her pain. "How could you, Kyle?" she asked, her voice low, trembling. "After everything? After all our dinners, our talks, our friendship?" She spoke of betrayal, of trust shattered, her words accusing, each one a direct hit. She had treated me like family, and I had, in her eyes, destroyed her family. There was no denying it, not with her standing there, so broken and so absolute in her certainty. I was forced to admit the affair, the words dry in my throat, the full weight of my actions pressing down on me, heavy and suffocating. Carla, when she called, was beyond fury. Her voice was icy, devoid of any pretense of professionalism. "The partnership is dissolved," she stated, not asked, the words clipped and final. "Mike wants you out, effective immediately. Don't even think about stepping foot on a Peterson construction site again." There were bitter recriminations, accusations of disloyalty, of undermining their family, their business. The legalities were swift and merciless, orchestrated by Carla. The papers arrived a few days later, stark black print on crisp white pages, detailing my expulsion from the company, the severance of ties complete. I signed them, the ink feeling cold beneath my fingers, the weight of the pen a confirmation of my folly. Amy was dragged into the brutal fallout. Brenda, heartbroken and vengeful, reached out to her, though I never knew what words were exchanged. Mike, too, targeted Amy, his threats against her chilling, painting her as a manipulative force, a homewrecker. Amy called me in tears, terrified. "He said he'd ruin me, Kyle," she sobbed. "He said he'd make sure I never worked in this town again." And then there was Dale. News of the affair's exposure spread like wildfire through our small Midwestern community. In a town where everyone knew everyone, and gossip traveled faster than any internet connection, our secret became everyone's business. Dale Harris, hearing the whispers, seeing his possessive grip on Amy further challenged, became even more volatile. His anger found a new legitimate target. He stalked Amy, showing up at her apartment, at the store, his threats escalating from veiled warnings to explicit vows of harm. "You're done, Amy," he'd scream, his face contorted. And so is he. I faced the condemnation from every direction. Friends who had once shared a beer or a laugh now averted their gaze, or offered curt nods that felt colder than outright scorn. Colleagues, other contractors I'd worked with for years, suddenly found themselves too busy for my calls. My reputation, once solid and built on hard work, was tarnished, reduced to a whisper and a shake of the head. Even Miguel, my loyal project manager, couldn't hide his profound disappointment. He didn't shout or accuse, which somehow made it worse. He just looked at me, his eyes clouded with a quiet sadness. "I thought you were different, Kyle," he said, his voice barely audible, as he packed his tools from my now empty office. "I really did. We had something good here. Real good." His words were a mirror, reflecting my own feeling of having let him down, of having squandered the trust he placed in me. Mike, meanwhile, reeling from the personal and professional wreckage, made his intentions clear, his rage turning to a chilling promise. "You'll pay for this, Kyle," he barked into the phone during our last terse conversation. "You'll pay for everything." It wasn't a threat, it was a vow. The dissolution of Peterson Construction was not merely a separation, it quickly devolved into a vicious legal battle, a scorched earth campaign orchestrated by Mike and Carla. Carla, with her sharp financial acumen, took the lead, her personal anger a potent fuel for her strategic dismantling of my stake in the business. Every asset I held, every piece of equipment, every penny I had invested was systematically targeted. She found every loophole, every clause in the partnership agreement, twisting them to ensure I walked away with nothing. The law, I quickly learned, could be a brutal instrument in the hands of someone determined. Mike, meanwhile, used his extensive connections within the community to ensure I faced maximum financial repercussions. Banks called in loans, suppliers refused credit. My reputation in the construction community, once a point of quiet pride, was not just tarnished, it was utterly destroyed. My phone, once a constant source of calls for new projects, fell silent. I tried to find work, calling old contacts, offering my skills, but the doors were shut. The whispers that followed my name were enough. I was branded a betrayer, and no one wanted to touch me. Amy, too, was caught in the economic and social undertow. Ostracized from the home improvement store, she lost her job. Other avenues for work closed off as well, the small-town gossip ensuring her name was equally tainted. She faced financial hardship, unable to pay her rent, and the harassment from Dale intensified, now that she had no job to escape to during the day. He seemed to relish her vulnerability, his presence a constant, dark shadow. I tried to support Amy, to help her where I could, but my own resources were dwindling rapidly. The savings account I had so diligently built, the modest house I had bought, all became targets in the legal wrangling. I watched as my financial stability, carefully constructed over years of hard work, dissolved before my eyes. Every payment I made to Amy was a further drain on a well that was quickly drying up. Brenda, true to her pain, filed for divorce from Mike. The proceedings were ugly, a brutal custody battle for their children dragging through the courts, further airing the scandal for the entire community to observe. The local newspaper, usually quiet on personal matters, ran a small article about the Peterson Construction Partnership dissolving, vague but damning. The community, always ready to watch a spectacle, gossiped about the scandal, its cruel words and judging glances further isolating Amy and me. We were pariahs, our names synonymous with the ugly destruction of a family. Even Miguel, though conflicted, remained distant. He had gone back to working for other contractors, his loyalty to me unable to reconcile with what he saw as an unforgivable betrayal. He would nod politely if our paths crossed at the lumberyard, but his eyes held a sadness that spoke of a deep disappointment, a trust irrevocably broken. I faced the harsh reality of my choices every single day. The loss of my business, the estrangement from friends, the complete collapse of my financial stability. I struggled with a profound regret, a heavy, suffocating burden of guilt that clung to me like a shroud. Sleep offered little respite, my nights filled with replays of the decisions that had led me down this ruinous path. Mike, consumed by his vow of vengeance, used every legal and personal avenue available to ensure I paid dearly. He had lost his wife, his family splintered, and he blamed me entirely. His anger was a force of nature. Carla, her quiet anger now a potent, relentless force, was instrumental in his campaign. She worked tirelessly, methodically, leaving no stone unturned, no avenue unexplored, in her pursuit of my complete and utter ruin. The quiet, watchful woman I had met in her office had transformed into a relentless adversary. Mike, broken but burning with a cold fire, dedicated himself to my complete downfall. His broken family, his public humiliation, all funneled into a singular, relentless pursuit of my ruin. He became a whisper in every ear, a poison in every potential conversation about work. He spread rumors, not just about the affair, but about my work ethic, my reliability, my honesty. Every lead I managed to scrounge up, every tentative promise of a small job, seemed to vanish after a phone call Mike must have made. Suppliers, those I dealt with for years, suddenly found reasons to deny me credit, to increase prices, making it impossible to even bid on the smallest projects. His hand was everywhere, unseen but undeniably present, tightening the noose around my neck. Dale Harris, emboldened by the public scandal that confirmed his suspicions, intensified his harassment of Amy. He made her life a living hell. He followed her, sent vicious texts, and once slashed her tires in the dead of night. Amy lived in a state of constant terror, her nerves frayed, her once quiet demeanor replaced by a jumpiness that broke my heart to witness. I tried to protect her, to intervene, but my diminished standing, my own lack of resources and reputation, limited my options. My calls to the police about Dale's harassment went nowhere. I was no longer a respected businessman, just a man embroiled in a local scandal. One afternoon, I found Dale cornering Amy outside the small convenience store where she now tried to pick up a few shifts. He was screaming at her, his face inches from hers. I stepped in, words exchanged, then shoves. It escalated quickly. Dale threw a punch, catching me in the jaw. I retaliated, a flurry of desperate anger and frustration. The police arrived, and a report was filed. Dale, with his established volatile reputation, got a warning. I, the outsider, the home wrecker, ended up with a charge for disturbing the peace, another black mark on my already tarnished record, another legal fee I couldn't afford. Carla, cold and efficient as ever, ensured that every legal avenue was exploited to keep me from recovering financially. The partnership dissolution, the small print I hadn't understood, was leveraged against me. Lawyers' letters arrived regularly, demanding payments I couldn't make, threatening liens. My modest pre-war house, the one I had been so proud to buy, was now at risk, suffocated by mounting debts and legal fees. Amy spiraled into a quiet depression, a despair that settled deep in her bones. She blamed herself for my ruin, her guilt a heavy burden she carried with visible pain. Our relationship, once a source of comfort and escape, now felt burdened, weighed down by the crushing reality of our shared consequences. The joy had fled, replaced by the grim solidarity of two people trapped in a deepening hole. I considered leaving town, packing what little I had left, and starting over somewhere far away. The thought was tempting, a siren song of escape. But the idea of running away from my responsibilities, from the mess I had made, grated against my Midwestern conscience. It felt like cowardice, a betrayal of the quiet fortitude I had always prided myself on. So I stayed, trying to pick up odd jobs, any small piece of work that would offer a few dollars. But the whispers and the turned backs were relentless. The landscape of my life became as barren as a field left fallow too long. Mike and Carla watched my decline, I knew it. I saw them sometimes, driving past in Mike's shiny new truck, Carla in the passenger seat, her expression unreadable. Mike's face a mask of grim satisfaction. Their anger, once loud, now manifested as a chilling testament to their victory. Peterson Construction, though damaged by the scandal, had been salvaged by their combined efforts, a testament to their resilience and their ruthlessness. Mike had kept his business, lost his wife, but gained his vengeance. I reflected on the stark contrast, the hopeful beginnings, the partnership, the dream of building something enduring. Now my life was a desolate state, a field of broken promises and withered hopes, all the result of a few desperate, foolish choices. Stripped of almost everything, my business, my savings, my reputation, the house now lost to mounting debts, I stood at a crossroads that felt more like a desolate intersection. The future, once a clear path, was now shrouded in an impenetrable fog. I saw no way forward in this town, in this life I had so carefully constructed and then so carelessly dismantled. Amy, broken by the ongoing harassment from Dale and the relentless public shaming, reached her own breaking point. One morning, her small apartment was empty. No note, no farewell, just the silence of a hasty departure. I called her phone repeatedly, but it went straight to voicemail. She was gone. A week later, a letter arrived, forwarded from her old address. It was brief, her handwriting shaky, a final goodbye. She acknowledged the irreversible damage, the impossibility of any real future together, and the need to simply disappear. "I hope you find peace, Kyle," she wrote. The words felt like a final blow, confirming the full, devastating scope of our shared ruin. Mike Peterson had achieved his revenge, but it was a hollow victory. He had salvaged Peterson Construction, yes, but he lived with a broken family, haunted by the bitterness of betrayal. I saw him sometimes from a distance, his booming laughter gone, replaced by a strained smile, a weariness in his eyes that spoke of a victory that tasted of ashes. Brenda and her children, though finding a new path, would forever carry the scars of that betrayal, their lives irrevocably altered. Carla Brown, successful in her business machinations, had won her battle, but at a cost. She remained isolated, her face harder, her eyes colder, her anger having calcified into a permanent part of her demeanor. She got what she wanted, but the Nadia was a piece of her own humanity. I took on a solitary, grueling job, far from the polished homes and manicured lawns of my old life. It was heavy labor, manual work that demanded little thought but much physical exertion. Laying pipe, digging ditches in the next county over, living in a cheap rented room. It was a form of penance, the physical ache a distraction from the deeper, ceaseless throb of regret. In the quiet of those lonely nights, I reflected on the choices I had made. The good intentions, the desire to help Amy, had been overshadowed by the selfish, impulsive act that had led to this catastrophe. I saw the arrogance in my belief that I could control the consequences, that my secret wouldn't touch the lives of others. The irony was bitter. I, who prided myself on precision and quality, had built my own ruin with clumsy, careless steps. My current setting, a sparsely furnished room on the edge of a forgotten town, was a stark contrast to the comfortable life I once had. The hum of the fluorescent light in the hallway, the distant drone of an 18-wheeler on the highway, these were the sounds that marked my nights now. No more the easy laughter of Mike and Brenda's home. No more the quiet intimacy with Amy. Only the silence and the echo of a conscience finally awakened. Sometimes in the dead of night, I'd hear the rustle of leaves outside my window, the creak of an old house settling. It mirrored my own quiet despair, the feeling of being hunted, of being prey to the relentless consequences of my actions. I realized the true cost, not just for myself, but for Mike, for Brenda, for their children, for Amy, for Miguel. Every single person touched by my selfishness bore a piece of the burden. I was left with a quiet anger, not just at Mike for his revenge, or Dale for his cruelty, but at the man I became, the man who had allowed his desires to eclipse his decency. The story of my life, the one I used to tell myself, had been rewritten by infidelity and betrayal. There was no grand resolution, no Hollywood ending, just a quiet, enduring understanding of my new, solitary reality under the vast, indifferent Midwestern sky. The price of breaking the fences had been paid, and I would spend the rest of my days living in the barren field I had cultivated.